Lauren Jaben, Mercedes Rex, and Lynda Young Coffee. We're excited to hear what all three of you have going on. We'll see your stop numbers and hopefully get excited to come visit either this weekend or next weekend for the studio tour. First up is Mercedes. Before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to tell everyone each artist will speak for about 10 minutes, and then you can put your questions and comments into the chat and we'll address them at the end. So feel free to put any comments in there and we'll ask them after all three have presented. Okay, now Mercedes can take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Um, Thank you, Diane, for putting this together. I'm excited to share with y'all what I've got going on, and we'll just dive right into it. Okay. So this weekend, I will be at my Austin studio tour. Stop is number 16. And, oops. I am an artist who specializes in a monoprinting process called water marbling, which involves floating pigment on the surface of thickened water and then using various tools to create patterns, which can then be lifted onto paper, or in my case, I do a lot of work on silk. And so this is one of the prints I'll have available this weekend. The current work I have explores themes of surrender and control, as well as scale. And the seeds for this work were really born from 3 weeks that I spent in Paradise. I had an opportunity last spring of 2024, to spend 3 weeks on residency in Turks and Caicos Island. And I went there with the intention of creating patterns for a wallpaper collection. And while there, I did come away with several patterns, but I also spent a lot of time reflecting on how elusive the muse can be. It's like, I think as artists, at least for me, I think a lot of times my challenge feels like time and not having enough time to create. And yet here I was with like 3 weeks with nothing else to do, really. I mean, I had emails and a couple of other things I had to stay on top of, but 3 weeks to create. And it didn't always flow, right? Like some days I'd be in a complete state of flow and other days would feel like a slog. And so I spent a lot of time reflecting on, and lamenting the fact that inspiration isn't just available on demand. Um, this piece here on the left is one of the pieces that has made its way into the world as wallpaper now. And so in that way, I'm playing with the scale of it because it's available. The original print is 18 by 24, and it's available now as full wallpaper size scale. But I found myself as I was working doing this kind of zooming in to little moments within the composition to find um, resonant compositions within the design. And so on the right-hand side, you see an example of what I consider to be kind of a composition within this larger field that I think works on its own. And here's another example of that. And so as I was working, I would kind of present the zoom scales, these zoom frames on my social media. And I really enjoyed the fact that, when you're looking at your phone, you can't tell the scale. And I think that also planted the seed for me wanting to see these compositions in a larger format. This is another piece that I thought would make its way into being wallpaper, but it ended up being, I think, too busy for wallpaper. But uh, I did spend a lot of time obsessing over these little squiggle formations that began to form. To create this piece, I first start by splattering paint on the surface, and then um, you guys can see my screen, yeah? Okay, cool. Just making sure. So I begin by splattering paint on the surface, and then I'm dropping these drops on top of these linear formations. And as I do that, because it's a dynamic process, right? The drops that land on top of the lines displace the paint, and they kind of like cause the lines to squish and scrunch in this way. And so I became obsessed with these and like wanting to select and extract them to be viewed at a larger scale because for me, the patterning here is so, it's like a biomorphic pattern that's kind of suggestive of earth strata. And so this is a piece that I released this past summer. This is a bandana on silk. And you
Mm,
can see the mother piece over here. And if you guys can tell where where the bandana has been
mm,
extracted from,
mm-hmm.
um, I really wanted to just enlarge it so that I could like exalt these beautiful formations that I really are just happenstance, right? I can't make them form in this way. And so I love that, but I was still limited if I'm working at this size. So the original print is 18 by 24 and the bandana is 20 by 20, but that's about as far as I could go with it at this scale. Um, here's a look into my wallpaper collection did launch last month, and this is several of the patterns on the left-hand side there that are now available in wallpaper format. So, but my dream would be to see these squiggles in like on a wall, like huge. And in order to do that, I would, of course, have to print larger. So, much to my delight, the family that runs the residency in Turks and Caicos was also interested in exploring working large format. And so they invited me back down to do a collaborative commission. And with marbling, you're only limited by the size of your tray. So here on the left-hand side, you see we've created a tray out of 2x4s and then lined it with a super thick plastic. I want to say there's like 50 gallons of marbling liquid in here to make this happen. The tray itself is 18 feet by 6 feet. And here I am trying to recreate those circular patterns at a much larger scale. And here's some pieces from the series I did down there. These ones are 4 feet by 4 feet, and on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, you see me getting closer at getting these squiggles to emerge at a much grander scale. This piece is 18 by 24. Part of the terms of this commission was that I would help the couples for young children to create some pieces for their room as well. And so enter a real opportunity to practice surrender because I've made a practice of sharing this art with others, and I've done a lot of teaching, but working with children is always exciting. So I'm teaching them about the medium, and they are like teaching me about surrender and flow for sure. These are some of the emergent patterns that these children were like not hesitant to uh, wildly gesticulate, right? It's just I think this became the real gift of that trip is uh learning sort of the brilliance that I think can come and that is available with this art when you work with it in the way that these children were working. So I came away with three pieces that I think are way too wild for wallpaper. I was still working on the wallpaper, but they just have stuck with me. And I feel like, each of these are on 18 by 24 sheets of paper. So they're getting at what I was trying to accomplish with some of those zoom frames where I'm like zooming in to find the resonant compositions within a print. And they're achievable because we're working at such a large scale. And so for this body of work that I have coming up, and on display this weekend and next, I am taking kind of everything that I've learned from this experience and trying to recreate this like dancing with the dialectic of control and surrender and summoning the muse. So here's me in my studio. My tray is much smaller. It's 8 feet by 4 feet. But my goal in doing these is to like while I'm creating, disconnect from the logic brain, the critic, the thinking brain, and just almost be like embodied. Very much, it feels very Pollock-esque. I'm like throwing paint down. And then there's a moment where I kind of pivot and switch and become the artist who looks for resonant compositions within the field of chaos and like freeze frames that like I would with a camera, but these are on canvas. So these are 2 feet by 2 feet stretched canvas pieces that I'll be sharing for the first time this weekend. And here's a few more, and I didn't want to share them all here, but yeah, this is where I'm at right now. In a way, it's so simple in theory, but it's not easy to do that dance. In fact, when I was just recently working, and I mean very recently, this was like last week where I was still trying to make some of these, um, that moment of knowing when to switch from the surrender of the creation back into like, okay, being intentional. Because with some of these pieces, I go back in and I might add like, a few intentional pieces, but um, it's it is a challenge, but it brings me so much joy and is super rewarding. So that's what I've got for y'all. And if you're wanting to find my work further, I'm at mercedesrex.com. And then on Instagram at Mercedes Rex Designs, it's Mercedes with a Z. Happens all the time that people get that one wrong. And the studio stop number 16.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Our next presentation is by Lynda Young Coffee.
Guess I should unmute. Let me go back to the beginning. Okay, there we are. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Diane. And it's fun to get to know a couple other artists that I hadn't met before to do this together. So I appreciate you putting this together and giving us a chance to kind of collect our thoughts about our work. I'm a landscape painter, and I describe myself as approaching the landscape from a contemplative, meditative standpoint. I've this long, narrow, horizontal format has been my focus for a while, and it kind of ties in with my practice. I have a regular meditation practice and spend kind of focus on kind of present moment, and it ties in real well with how I approach my work. I have in the past done, like a lot of artists that work with the landscape, done plein air work and sketched in the landscape, but there's a time element that goes into that where the light changes, the colors change, the sky changes, the clouds move. But what I'm interested right now is a specific moment in time that kind of stops me. If I'm out hiking, come around the corner and go, whoa, or just as startling, or whether it's the colors. This one, I think that if I recall at the time, it was the combination of the colors brought me together, and then the puffiness and the regularity and irregularity of the clouds kind of were what caught my eye. So it makes it easy for me to draw on, rather than just sitting down to sketch, to use my iPhone, because it's in my back pocket at the time anyway. And I stand in one spot and just keep taking photographs then when I go back, I kind of put them together like a puzzle, because they're never exact. And so that I draw out some sort of composition from that. So for me, there's the experience, there's the images, there's going back to the studio, and there's memory of it, and then there's a time element because it depends on how many years it's been since I took the photograph. So the paintings in this series are the result of a residency at Ghost Ranch near Abiquiu, New Mexico, for 3 Octobers in a row, 2020, 2021, and 2022. I spent 28 days in a casita in a compound with 5 to 8 other artists. Each of us had our own duplex. One side was our bedroom, one side was our studio, so it was available to us 24/7. And many of these landscapes that you're seeing that you'll see this well, we're not morning, this noon, were what I viewed as I walked out my door in the morning. It was kind of an incredible vista. That first one, Orphan Mesa, I'll go back to it, is oil on paper, and it's 12 inches by 48 inches. And as I said, that was the clouds and the vibrancy of the color that caught my eye. This one, Red Rain, is also oil on paper. It's 11 inches by 46 inches and captured my imagination because of a natural phenomena I learned about when I was there. When you see rain on the horizon at sunset in those mountains, often you have this red glow with it, and they call it red rain. And it was a real dramatic evening, kind of exciting. This next one from the high mesa is also oil on paper. I do the oil on paper quite a bit when I'm traveling because it's so much easier to transport. And I just gesso it on both sides and then kind of paint on from there. In this one, there was a glow along the ridge at sunset, as well as this purple and the stormy clouds. And that's what, grabbed me at the time. And I work with these with a lot of layers of transparent color. I like having the vibrancy of the color, but I like the layering, the thin layers, because it gives more of a sense of depth and light, which is what I'm kind of going for. A new type of artwork has emerged in the process of discovering this landscape of New Mexico. I had never spent this much time in it. So I had not done commissions much before. And so I started working with doing them. The next 3 are much larger than the ones I've just showed you. This one, Mesa View Sunset, is a triptych, and it's all on canvas, and it's 22 inches by 105 inches with each panel 22 by 35. This next one, the Coyote View, is 40 inches high and 90 inches long, and each panel is 40 high, 30 wide. I learned a bit along the way, as I'm sure anyone who's done commissions learns, is I sent these in a horizontal format to the person who was commissioning them, and they decided to turn them vertically, and which completely changed the composition. And it was an interesting challenge because I was used to the more focus on the clouds and the sky, with the rocks and the cliffs more in the background. And I remember when I used to think in terms of fear of the pencil sometimes as opposed to the charcoal. In this case, it was fear of rocks. And so we had to kind of do some work on that together. But anyway, it did come together. And the last one, I just delivered this to Santa Fe in July. This is Pedernal at 6:41 p.m. and it is oil on paper, 15 by 54. And it was fun to deliver it because they wanted to go ahead and hang it. So I got to be part of the process of the lighting and the hanging, and which doesn't usually happen as the artist. This next series is a new one for me. Lots of shifts in it. It's a night series. It's a departure and a completely new direction. And
Hi.
I'm sorry. I was awake. I don't sleep well in altitude. And so I was awake early and late, and I often went outside my little casita And we were in a dark sky area, and each of our casitas had a bare yellow light bulb on it. And mostly when people went to bed, they turned off the light, but almost inevitably, at least one person would leave their light on. So it created this wonderful glow in this complete darkness. And so I would be out there in my robe with a parka over it, wandering around with my camera taking photographs, probably looking like a crazy woman, but it was such an experience because so much quiet, because we were at the end of a road with nothing going on. And it was both intimate and solitary, but companionable at the same time. You know, I knew everybody was there, they just were all asleep. This one's, and the scale changed. This is still horizontal, but this is 7.5 by 15, so much smaller, which seems to fit the intimacy as well. This is another one in the beginnings of them. This is 8 inches by 14 3/4. This one is, as it started developing, it's a whole different size, a standard kind of 10 by 14. This one was in the Red Dot show, and each of the casitas had a different colored trim. I'm red, and so that's me, and then my neighbor. So they worked up the hill. The next two are part of a brand new series that I've been working on of a square format. They're mostly 7.5 inches square, and both the format and the shape kind of a reflection of the intimacy of the experience against the largeness of the landscape, like in those big vistas. And then this may sound a little bit overly poetic, but even in my aloneness, I felt that sense of other people, other presence with me in the quiet, kind of velvety space. That's what I think of that kind of darkness, is kind of velvety outside the door of the casita. And it was kind of comforting and welcoming, even restful, and kind of a counterpoint to the brightness of the days. This is part of a series that I'm working on right now, going from dawn to dusk, dusk to dawn. And both of these are, again, the 7.5 inches square. Casitas at dawn and rising light. I'm fascinated by the colors that show up. I mean, as an artist, then you can go further with the colors, but a lot of them I was so surprised by what happens in that landscape with color and light. And these are the last two in this series so far. This was the pinks are so pink, the purples are so purple, the blues are so, aqua or turquoise, or maybe they're cobalt. And this is the last one I've just completed. All these are oil on paper. These have been the kind of the response to for me, a new, that kind of captivating, compelling landscape that continues to be, I guess, 5 years into it, a focus of my artistic vision. So I appreciate your attention to it and to listening to it. You're invited to stop by my studio, which is at the stop 136, these next 2 weekends. And I have a studio along with 2 other artists, Victoria Corbett and Anna Malum, and we'd love to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last presentation is by Lauren Jaben.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Still no?
Still no.
Okay, let me go back to Zoom. Share screen, start broadcast. Okay, that should work.
Yep, that's working.
Okay. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today. And thanks to Women in Their Work for inviting us to share our work. My name is Lauren Jaben. I'm a collage artist, and I will be stop number 17 over the next 2 weekends for the studio tour. Mercedes and I are actually showing in the same building, but in different studios. So you can do a twofer if you decide to come see us. Um, I think most people might know me from the circular collages that I make from tiny bits of found paper. I worked this way for quite a long time, and I slowly began to introduce nonlinear shapes into the forms. I was grappling with self-imposed restraint of working solely in this circular format. For this piece, I layered a bouquet of flowers on top of on top of index entries um, from a world atlas, which I considered a pandemic wish for healing. Before I started making the circular pieces, I worked in a more narrative way, often illustrating stories or feelings about family and friends. This piece that I did in 2002 for a friend ended up becoming an album cover for the musician Kim Ritchie, and it was my first big sale. So 23 years ago. This piece I made on the day of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012. And this one after the 2004 presidential election. During the pandemic, I made postcards as a way to connect with loved ones while we quarantined. You can see the hands, which I considered sort of a reference to all the hand washing that we did, as well as a prayer, flowers representing healing again. So last spring, I moved into a larger studio, and having more space means I can work on several pieces at the same time, which is a way of working that I absolutely love. I find it just really inspiring. My goal during this time, this last year or so, has become to loosen up, sort of still shaking off the restraint of having made the circles and for so long. And I've been allowing myself time for playful experimentation and letting the materials guide the way. Drawing on past minimalist work, I began pairing found packaging that I had long been collecting with vintage floral illustrations that I meticulously cut out with the sharp X-Acto blade. I have a self-imposed and mostly followed rule that I try not to actively seek out or shop for collage materials. Rather, I do my best to make use of what is in front of me. Sources are myriad, and I might include a tag from a new item of clothing, cosmetics packaging, or a piece of wrapping paper. Oftentimes, friends will bring materials they've saved for me, and I love this element of warm serendipity this adds to the work. This black element in this piece is cut from a box of ink brought to me by a dear friend's daughter. The juxtaposition of man-made and natural elements is a theme I have returned to again and again. Here, the two half-round elements are made from a coaster from a restaurant in Providence, Rhode Island that takes its staff out to pick cherry blossoms every spring, later to be used to create delicacies in a kitchen. With the addition of the organic forms, hard edges are softened. Elements may be askew or off kilter, reflecting my desire to loosen up both in art and in life. I think of these pieces as a soothing balm for difficult times, as well as an encouragement to find beauty in the ordinary things we see around us, and a reminder of our impermanence. I imagine them being collected in a series, hanging side by side and becoming a sort of macro version of the seemingly microscopic elements I was using in the circles. I've also been working on a series of larger pieces, which I've been referring to as constructions. They're made mostly from packaging materials that I have collected over the years, but had never used in my work before now. These large black constructions are inspired in part by the work of a kindred spirit and fellow scavenger, the sculptor, Louise Nevelson. I'm also enjoying playing with color in a new way and combining hues I might not ordinarily choose. Sometimes when I arrive at the studio and I don't know where to start, I put on a podcast or some music, settle in, pick up a sharp blade, and start cutting things out. It's a way of working that is both meditative and generative. It seems the more paper I cut, the more there is. I often don't yet know how these cutout elements will come into play until much later. The piece on the right is a direct result of the circle on the left, which contains a Mary Oliver poem that I cut out of a book of her poetry. And so the piece on the right is the page without the poem. Many of the floral elements in this piece had been cut out several years ago and tucked away. As I work, there can be an element of rediscovery as I unearth long forgotten things. Time and again, I find just what I need as I sort through my collection of oftentimes forgotten papers. I'm experimenting with layer things in a looser way and letting them not make perfect sense. I have become less attached to controlling outcome and more interested in the process. I welcome the element of chance, and I always love a happy accident. Here I've combined one of the cutout bouquet silhouettes with materials that were waiting in a chaotic pile on my work table to be used in one of the large black constructions. And finally, I'll just show a couple of pieces that I'm working on right now that might change a lot. They're still unglued. Here's one um, sort of seasonal piece, sort of laid out. It's laid out on an old book cover, a vintage book cover. Also, this one laid out on a book on the inside, the end pages of a book. And that's it. Thanks again for coming, and come see me. Stop number 17, right across the street from Women in Their Work.
Thanks so much. Thank you all for sharing your work today. It seemed like scale plays a component in all of your work. I feel like we lost somebody. Here we go. Um, Mercedes and Lauren, it seems like you guys are working larger, but then Lynda, you were kind of scaling back. So I'm curious how all of you kind of arrived at like these scale changes and
Well, I have a funny story. The first circle I ever made, which is right here. I was going to include this in my slideshow, but I ran out of time. So here's this tiny, tiny little,
Wow.
tiny thing, and I've always made tiny, tiny work. I'm this 6 foot tall woman who just makes very tiny work, and the fact that I made a 27-inch circle felt huge to me. I mean, it's just like it was such a stretch for me to get this big to a 22 by 30. And it's just been this slow arc of me just really, really pushing myself because I think it's really hard to look at a tiny piece like this and really get anything out of it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so much came up for me in trying to prepare for this talk. And one of the things was a project that an art teacher in, I don't know, third grade had us do, where I think she had us like make these abstract paintings. And then she had us take this 1 inch by 1 inch square and go around and like find a moment within the piece that we then blew up. And I don't remember her name. I don't, but I think my mom has the piece somewhere, and I was like, man, I need a photograph of that one. But I think that set the stage a little bit for me, maybe. But also, I have a background in photography, and so I think about how my photographic inclinations relate to the work I'm doing now, where, you move through the world with your camera, and it's this whole field, and then like you lock in your composition and it's got to be just right, or maybe it's right if you move it an inch over, and then you can represent it in this exaggerated way. So I am playing a little bit with I don't know, it's struggling internally with like some of this has to be digitally represented if I want it to come across at the size that I am wanting to convey. Um, but scale, and gosh, like I'm like working at trying to articulate. I think the three of us were reflecting on this. It's like so hard to put words to the thing that like moves you or the reason why you're making the work, but to be continued, you know.
Um, for me, a lot of times the work kind of determines it. I'll try to do it in a size that I'm accustomed to, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
Mm.
So, it doesn't fit. And so I have to kind of revamp. Um, for me, I think some of it depends on the experience I've had with it, with the landscape. Because for me, I have to know the landscape somewhat. I have to spend some time in it to there are some places I've been and the landscape was wonderful and I got great photographs, but I didn't spend enough time there to know it, so I've not been successful in painting it.
Right.
There's a connection that way, and but the scale, it's like the art's in charge.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciated how you talked about the nighttime scenes being intimate and then they starting to become smaller and like, yeah, they're more intimate. Like you have to be close to them to see the details and yeah.
I'm thinking about maybe trying just to see what would happen if I do it a little larger.
Hmm.
But it would be an experiment because right now they're very strongly want to be the size they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, Linda, with your work, I was thinking about that. Are you mostly working with like a phone camera to capture the images at night? Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
first, yeah, the first year I went, somebody had the one that you can shoot night photos and get color.
Mm.
So I went home and asked, I said, for Christmas, I want that phone.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, because that was my question. I thought like, how much artistic freedom did you take with the color, or how much did you have to rely on memory? And then at a certain point, when do you switch and say like, oh, I have to just kind of respond to the what the painting needs, and the light was so central to your work. I love that.
Yeah, sometimes all of the above, but a lot of times those kind of photos, you don't have to mess with it. I mean, they're so dramatic with that possibility to them, but you can have fun with the color too if you want. So, you know, it depends on the setting, but that that environment for anybody who's spent any time in New Mexico, is just it startles me that those colors exist. I mean, you get the why the Native Americans had so many their rituals and spiritual practices there, because it's like, whoa, you know.
I studied photography in Santa Fe.
Oh, how cool.
Lauren, I'm glad we're neighbors because I had a ton of questions for you. One of them is just and but then you were kind of answering them as we went. So, but I want to see your studio, and I was thinking like, do you have a way that you catalog your source material? You referenced a pile on your table, so I thought probably not, but I was curious about that.
You know, it's a very organic process. I'm not a highly organized person, but somehow it all works out. I'm that person who knows, you can't see I have one of those big metal tool drawers over here.
Mm.
And I know exactly where the little picture of the dollar bill is. And like in like the third drawer
Wow.
down, it's under like half the stack. Like I know where stuff is just after all these years. And I don't know where everything is. Like I said when I was talking, like sometimes I'll just start digging around and what I needed and maybe didn't know I needed will appear. But I mostly catalog by size. I don't catalog by color or subject matter. I have these tiny drawers that have tiny, tiny pieces in them, and then I have bigger drawers that have medium-sized pieces. Um, I do have some like little books with mylar sleeves. If I've started to cut out very delicate things, I'll file them away in there so I can flip through and see, because those are things that are more delicate and could be ruined if they just get thrown in a drawer. Um, let's see. I wonder if I can pull this out and show you guys. It's kind of fun. I have things like this, like drawers that look like this.
I feel like this is organized.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I don't, this is one of this, there's not very many of these. These are like things that are sort of one of a kind and irreplaceable, and I definitely don't want to lose track of them. So yeah, my special drawer.
Mercedes, you were talking about how at your residency that the muse sometimes is there, sometimes isn't. And I'm kind of curious, just because of some of my experience with it too, is what do you think is a good length of time for a residency, and
Mm.
what do you do when the muse doesn't show up?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that was my first and only residency, and it was 3 weeks, and that was awesome. That felt like a good amount of time. What else was happening? I think like taxes were due. There was like little things that I was like, oh God, I like gotta get back to the real world. But I love the question of like, how do we invite the muse? Turns out, I feel like so many artists have been thinking about this forever, right? And Lauren, you mentioned listening to podcasts, and it's like, I mean, the truth is there's so many other things I have to do to run a business as an artist that I'm not always creating. And so there's sometimes too much of a gap between those studio sessions that it's like I have to relearn it again every time. Like, what are my lily pads? What are my anchors that kind of get me back into flow? But one of my answers, and Lauren, maybe we should trade notes, is podcast, man. It's like just every time I get in the studio, just listen to Rick Rubin. Just get Rick Rubin in my ear talking about the creative process. Because yes, this is why we're doing it. And then I'm in flow again. So that's
Or bright, yeah.
that's one
Or
of my go-tos. Elizabeth Gilbert's been really helpful. But for me, podcasts and like um having a way to commune with someone who's using language and I'm like, yes, that's it. This is what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it helps me kind of like find my way back in. But then I will just share this one thing. I during the pandemic, I started making marbling kits because I was like teaching classes prior to the pandemic and doing markets. And so a lot of my income was public facing and it was the pandemic and I was out of work. And so a student from a former class had asked me to put together a marbling kit and I was like, okay, maybe I'll do it. They ended up being a great seller. Everyone was stuck at home, but I've taken to like I marble the outside of the boxes. And I've talked about this so much, but it feels really important to me. They have become, and it's what got me through this most recent like block in the studio. I just care about the boxes not being naked. There's this cardboard box, and so I like want them to just not be naked. That's all I care about. And so when I'm making those, I'm not thinking about color, I'm not thinking about form, I'm not thinking about where the paint needs to land. I'm trying to sometimes work fast and just throw paint down. And I'm like, had a very intense session this last weekend trying to finish work for the studio tour, but the answer was make the boxes, like make something that releases the pressure. Pressure feels like a killer for flow, right? I went down there, I was like, oh, I've got 3 weeks, I've got to make these patterns for wallpaper. And that's like a lot of pressure, right? It's like, well, I've got to come away with something. And so in my journaling about that and thinking about it, it's like I really see this link between pressure being a real killer and anything I can do that's an antidote to that pressure. So it's like, well, I just gotta marble more boxes. Like I felt like, and I ended up like trying to get all the work on canvas, and then was like, oh shoot, I now that I have this tray set up, I should really get these boxes made because I'm probably gonna sell kits over the studio tour weekend. And I felt like all my best work is on these cardboard boxes now, but it doesn't matter. It's all about just like getting through it.
Yeah, I started making because yeah, there are days when you show up where it's like you don't exactly know, what you're going to do, and there might be things you're supposed to be doing, but you might not feel like doing it, or you might not be ready to do it. And I just started, well, cutting out things is good for me. Just like sitting down, picking up the blade, and just like diving in, and then I see what comes of it, and I almost always like that. This creates a lot of momentum for me. But I also started making these little 8 by 10 little, I'm calling them sketches or
Mhm.
studies. Just I'm looking through my scraps on the table, and I'm not spending a lot of time. I'm sort of bypassing, the rational brain, and I'm just kind of making these little 10-minute little pieces, and that is really helpful to me just to kind of dive in, and then everything seems to follow pretty nicely from there.
Yeah. There's and y'all probably seen it, the TED Talk, Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk, where my favorite part is when she says, "I'm here, where's the muse?" And I think that is so wonderful. It's like, I showed up, would you show up too?
Well,
And
I like what Chuck Close says, like what is it, like inspiration is for amateurs, professionals just show up and start working.
yeah, you had the Mary Oliver as part of one of the works. Lauren,
Yeah.
you have other muses that you work with
That
in
was
your
a
work?
commission. That was a commission request. I don't do a lot of poetry really, but that one piece I did include poem.
Right.
There's a couple sculptors, oddly, that are inspiring to me. One being Louise Nevelson that I talked about. Like I was just so struck by her work when I saw years ago a giant wall-sized all black installation, just little pieces of things, and I just can't forget about it. And I think that was kind of coming out when I started making these black pieces. And also Giacometti, the sculptor, just those elongated figures. I'm just really, really, you can see I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
really liking that shape right now. The obvious ones for a collage artist, Schwitters, and locally Lance Lesher. Like when I first saw Lance Lesher's work, that he did a show at the Contemporary when it was across the street from where it is now on Congress Avenue. And I think I stopped making work for an entire year. I was just like, what's the point? He's already doing it. Like, how could I possibly do anything better than that? I got really, like, I loved it so much. Yeah, so definitely Lance. I'm inspired by the Dadaists. I love the idea of a ready-made, of just like taking things that exist and seeing them in a different way. And it goes back to sort of just appreciating the ordinary. That's something that I, you know, am a fan of.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Art can be very inspiring looking at somebody else's art, and sometimes it can absolutely stop you in your tracks.
Yeah, and I think it was indicative of where I was at the time. I had 3 young children, and I was, my art was already sort of on the back burner. I was just so mired in parenthood, and I went and saw that, and I was just like, oh my God, like I think if I saw it now, it might be a little different.
Yeah. No, it's timing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going back to the residency, Lynda, do you have a idea of what the perfect time for residency is?
I don't know about perfect time, but when I got ready to do this one in New Mexico, when I was invited to do it, you could do 2 or 4 weeks, and I was kind of a little bit hesitant. And the person that was in charge of it said, people do 2 week residencies all the time, but just as you get started, it's over. And that had been my experience. I had done several, and that had exactly been my experience. And so I decided to trust her and do the 28 days, or just about a month. And it made a huge difference because it takes a while to settle in, and it's kind of stock, especially if it's a new environment. And if you're by yourself or you're with other artists, there's so many things to adapt to. But that I found out that for me that was correct, because by the time I got everything set up, it was halfway into the first week. And then you have to be conscious, depending on what you're working in, if it dries in time. So
Mm.
it shortens it on the other end. So the 4 weeks turned out to be really, it really was, seemed to be ideal. I don't know, I know they have ones that are 3 months or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it might be fabulous. I guess it depends on what you have, what commitments you have where you live,
Yeah.
and how you juggle that. But I was just curious as to how Mercedes felt about it.
Yeah, I don't have another thing to compare it to, but 3 weeks was amazing. It was amazing, and it did feel, it felt like enough, but yeah, 4 weeks sounds great.
It looks like early on in the presentation, Lauren had a question for you, Mercedes.
Oh
Have you
yes.
experimented with other textile processes?
Yes, I have, and that was kind of, so I studied photography in school, but I did a lot of non-silver and alternative processes and cameraless photography where I was in the dark room. And I really liked being in the dark room, so I always used to say, like, with that, I mean, you can still be in a dark room, but I liked color. It was just like I lost my creative outlet for a while, and my road back was experimenting with textile dyeing, so natural dyes, but also some synthetic dyes, and again, like working with ice. Everyone's like, maybe a lot of us have heard of ice dyeing now, but it was new to me, and uh. You mentioned chance. Like, I love an element of chance in art, not in life. I think it's like so challenging in life that, like, I think that's why I gravitate to it in art. It just feels like a place where it's like, oh, this element of surprise where I'm like, I didn't make this. How is this
Yeah.
here? I love that. But so I got some of that with some of my experimental processes with textile dyeing. And I think that's why when I got my hands on marbling, it has a long history in book arts, but it just felt like yeah, put it on silk.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm muted. Thank you so much for hopping on the Zoom and sharing your work with us. I hope everyone will come to your studios. Tomorrow night, Women in Their Work has an art block party that includes Jaben Studio and Lattice Studio, which has Mercedes' work. It's from 6 to 9, and then we'll be here both weekends, Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 6. And I think you guys will be too,
Yeah.
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 studios.
Mhm.
Great. Well, thank you again and have a great weekend.
Just want to
Thanks
thank
everybody for
three
coming.
artists.
Thanks,
Thank you
Dan.
so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
That
you.
was fun.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.